Have you ever been in a room full of family? The clinking of silverware, quiet laughter floating around, and yet felt completely alone? It's a strange kind of silence, the kind that doesn't come from a lack of sound, but from something hollow inside you. That's where my story truly began, at a Sunday dinner that seemed like any other, until it wasn't. The air was filled with the familiar smell of roasted chicken and polite small talk, the kind of joy people wear like a mask during family gatherings. I sat at my usual spot, near the end of the table, my quiet little corner where I could observe, listen, and blend in without really being seen. My plate was half finished, much like my patience, scattered with food and unspoken thoughts. I nodded and smiled on cue, playing my part in a performance I'd been in for years. Then Iris, my daughter-in-law, broke through the hum of conversation. Her voice was smooth and polished, but sharp enough to cut through glass. "So, Lenore," she said, swirling her wine with that practiced poise of hers, "how does it feel being useless?" The word dropped like a stone in water, deliberate, cruel, and meant to be heard. She smiled wide, scanning the table for her audience. My son, Caden, gave a small laugh. His sister-in-law followed with an awkward giggle. And even my grandson, the same boy I'd once rocked to sleep, let out a faint smirk before looking away. For a moment, everything went still. The sounds around me blurred into a dull buzz. I placed my glass of water back on the table carefully, my hands steady, a small island of calm in a sudden storm. I looked at Iris, really looked at her. The sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, the linen blouse I recognized. I'd paid for that, of course, another quiet gift she accepted as if it were her due. Her face was a mask of charm, her confidence a fortress. I straightened my back, just slightly. And when I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost a whisper. "How does it feel, knowing this useless one won't be paying your bills anymore?" Silence fell, deep, heavy, absolute. Iris's perfect smile trembled. Caden froze mid-bite, his fork suspended in mid-air. No one laughed this time. My words didn't need to be loud. The truth had its own volume. Slowly, I pushed my chair back. The sound of its legs scraping against the hardwood floor felt final. I picked up my purse, gave a polite nod to the stunned faces around the table, and walked through the patio doors into the afternoon sun. The sunlight wrapped around me like an old friend. For the first time in years, I let out a long breath, one that carried the weight of years I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Behind me, the family I had held together for so long sat frozen in shock. But something inside me had shifted, quietly, permanently. And as I walked toward my car, I knew exactly where I was headed. Home. To my little office and to a locked drawer that held the story of my silence. When I got home that evening, the house greeted me with a quiet that felt heavier than usual. No chatter, no dishes clinking, just the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway like it was counting down the last moments of my patience. I walked straight to my study, the one place in that entire house that still felt like mine. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in a sliver of golden light that cut across the shelves and dust motes floating lazily in the air. I pulled out the bottom drawer of my old wooden desk. The familiar creak it made was oddly comforting. Inside was a small black ledger, worn, frayed at the edges, but filled with stories numbers could tell better than words ever could. Page after page, my handwriting stared back at me, each line a quiet reminder of every time I'd stepped in to help. The first entry was dated May 12th, 2017, $4,200. Caden had just started his new business back then. He'd come over one afternoon, full of fire and ambition. His words were smooth, his eyes convincing. "Mom, it's just a small loan," he'd said. "You'll have it back in no time." Back then, I believed him. Of course I did. That's what mothers do. We believe. I remembered signing the check and handing it to him with a proud smile. He'd kissed my cheek and said, "You'll see, Mom, I'll make you proud." I had no idea that was just the beginning of a long list of promises that would fade faster than the ink on that page. The next entry, August 2018, $1,600. Then March 2019, $3,000. By the time I reached the last page, the total sat at just over $48,000. $48,000. 48,000 reasons to stop being silent. I traced the numbers with my fingertip and felt a dull ache in my chest, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Years of love quietly taken for granted. I had never told anyone about the ledger. Not Caden, not Iris, not even my late husband before he passed. It was my secret, my quiet reminder of every sacrifice made under the name of family. But that night, as I stared at that total, I realized something. I wasn't keeping a record of money. I was keeping a record of respect, the kind that had slowly disappeared from my own children's eyes. I closed the ledger softly, locked it again, and sat back in my chair. The evening sun was slipping below the trees, painting the walls in warm gold. I could almost hear my husband's voice in my head. Calm, steady, always practical. "Lenore, they only take what you allow them to." And for the first time, I whispered back, "I know, but they won't anymore." The plan that would change everything started right there, between the fading light, the scent of old paper, and a heart that had finally had enough. The following Sunday, I called everyone over. No one suspected anything. After all, I hosted family dinners for years. But this time, I didn't cook. There was no roast chicken in the oven, no table set with fine china. Just me, a stack of envelopes, and that black ledger resting quietly beside my cup of tea. When Caden, Iris, and the others arrived, they looked confused. "Mom, are you okay?" Caden asked, noticing the untouched kitchen. "I'm fine," I said calmly. "Please, have a seat. There's something I need to talk about." They exchanged glances, the kind that carry a hint of discomfort, like when you know something's coming but hope you're wrong. Once everyone's settled, I reached for the ledger. My hands didn't tremble. I opened it slowly, letting the sound of paper fill the silence. "Do you remember," I began, "when you asked me for $4,200 to start your business?" Caden blanked. "Yeah, that was years ago. I told you I held up my hand gently. "Please, let me finish." Then, one by one, I began reading each entry. August 2018, $1,600. March 2019, $3,000. October 2020, $2,500. Every loan, every emergency, every favor. Iris shifted in her seat. "Lenore, you don't have to bring all this up." "Oh, but I do," I interrupted softly, "because I've realized something. You see, love without respect turns into debt, and I'm done collecting interest on disappointment." The room went utterly still. Caden looked down, his jaw tight. Iris folded her arms, pretending confidence she didn't have. I took a sip of tea and continued. "This ledger isn't about the money. It's about how easy it became for you all to ask, and how easy it became for me to say yes. That stops today." I reached into my bag and placed a set of documents on the table. Legal ones. "My lawyer helped me set up a new arrangement," I said evenly. "From now on, every financial matter connected to this family will go through proper paperwork, receipts, agreements. No more silent generosity." Caden frowned. "Mom, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or regret. But it passed quickly, replaced by that familiar defensiveness. He stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We're family." "Yes," I said, standing too. "We are. Which is why I should have done this sooner, before family started feeling like a one-way street." Iris muttered something under her breath, but I ignored her. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out. The garden was in full bloom, sunlight spilling over the flowers my husband and I once planted together. "Do you know what he used to say?" I said softly, more to myself than to them. "He'd tell me that love is a gift, not a contract. But when people start confusing kindness for weakness, it's time to rewrite the terms." I turned back toward them, my voice steady. "You're welcome to stay for tea, but not for excuses." And with that, I closed the ledger, one last time. The sound was final, like the closing of a door that had been left open for too long. The days after that meeting were quiet, not peaceful quiet. The kind of silence that hums with tension, like a storm that's already passed but left the air heavy. No one called, no one visited. The phone, once always ringing with someone needing a favor, suddenly went still. I noticed the difference right away. At first, I thought it might hurt, that absence, that sudden emptiness. But what I felt instead was clarity. For the first time in years, my mornings were mine. I had coffee without the constant buzzing of obligation in my head. I read books, tended to my garden, and even joined a small writing group in town. And as I rediscovered pieces of myself, I realized how much of my life had been quietly consumed by other people's needs. But peace, it seems, always comes with a test. About 2 months later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Caden stood there, looking nothing like the confident man who once brushed off my warnings. His shoulders were tense, his eyes tired. "Mom," he started, his voice low. "I'm sorry." The words caught me off guard. He hesitated, looking down at his hands. "I've been awful. I took advantage of you, of your kindness. Iris and I were having problems. She didn't like what happened that night, but I've been thinking about it ever since." I stayed quiet, letting him speak. "I thought you'd always just be there," he said finally. "Like you always were when Dad died. Like you were when I failed the first time. I forgot you're human too." Something in me softened, not because I'd forgotten the hurt, but because he'd finally said what I'd been waiting to hear for years. I reached out and placed a hand on his. "Caden," I said gently, "being there for family doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. I was wrong too, for letting it go on that long." He nodded, his eyes glistening. Then, for the first time in a long time, my son hugged me, not out of habit, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. As he turned to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Mom," he said, "you were right that day, at dinner." I smiled faintly. "About what?" He took a deep breath. "Respect. I think I finally understand what it really costs when you don't give it." After he left,
I stood by the window again, watching him drive away. The same garden bloomed outside, but this time it looked different, brighter, alive. It wasn't about money anymore. It never had been. It was about something much deeper. The moment when you finally choose your own peace over someone else's comfort. Months passed, and life found a new rhythm. The house that once echoed with others' needs now carried only the quiet sounds of peace. A kettle's soft whistle, a clock's steady ticking, the wind brushing through curtains. One afternoon, while sorting through old papers, I came across an envelope I'd written to myself years ago. The kind you seal in a moment of weakness, hoping one day you'll be strong enough to open it. On the front, in faded ink, it simply read, "For when you finally say enough." I sat at my desk, that same old wooden one, and slowly opened it. Inside was a short note. My handwriting was shaky, but the words were steady. You give and give because it's what you do best, but one day you'll realize you deserve the same care you give to everyone else. When that day comes, don't feel guilty. Feel free. I smiled through quiet tears. That version of me, tired, unsure, but still hopeful, had somehow known I'd find my strength again. I folded the note back into the envelope and placed it next to the ledger. Not out of anger, but as a reminder of both who I was and who I'd become. Later that week, I went to the lawyer's office one last time. I changed my will not out of spite, but out of purpose.
Caden would still receive something, of course, but most of my estate, the savings, the house, and even my late husband's pension, I directed toward a scholarship fund for women rebuilding their lives after loss. Women who'd been told they were too old, too tired, or too late to start again. Because I wanted my legacy to be more than money. I wanted it to be strength, the kind that whispers, you can begin again, even after everything. That night, I brewed a cup of tea and sat on the porch. The garden swayed in the evening breeze, roses, lilacs, and marigolds glowing softly in the fading light. I thought about my husband, my children, and all the years I'd spent trying to keep everyone happy. Then, for the first time, I whispered into the quiet, I did it. I finally kept a promise to myself. A single tear rolled down, not of sadness, but of peace. And as the stars began to appear one by one, I realized something simple, yet profound. The moment you stop chasing approval, you start finding freedom. And sometimes, that's the most beautiful ending of all.